Fritz, what is the exact size of Battletech? That's what we're going to explore in this narrative. And this was building on some print and play PDF buildings, printing them out in color on not necessarily loose leaf paper, but not like hard cardstock, something in the middle, cutting them out, taping them, and having a fairly presentable, throw down some model trees and a couple of small little other details. You can have a really, really big, presentable city for City Fight City Tech, literally in an afternoon's worth of work. And portability is there. The buildings nest in each other. There's a lot of these print and play templates out there as a first step in terms of Battletech terrain. But the question is, if it's not specific Battletech or if it's multi-tech, how does it scale with mechs? Meaning, we don't want the mechs to tower over these buildings, but they shouldn't be so small that the buildings tower over them. Just what is the scale in Battletech? My perception and my understanding was, if we look at railroad terrain, model railroad terrain, because that can be repurposed for a lot of wargaming terrain, especially if you can get it used and like a good bulk sale, Z scale. That was kind of the scale of mechs. Now, things are kind of thrown all over the place because the artwork has not always been consistent and the description of mechs has not been consistent. And we could say canon consistent is how do they appear in the various games? What is the scale of those mechs? A couple of examples. The old technical readout under the Spider. It's got a Spider mech and it's got a guy running next to it, running for cover. And you look and you're like, okay, I understand it's a light mech. I understand there is going to be a size difference, not only in bulk and width, but actual height between, say, a Spider and a Warhammer or an Atlas. But you're looking at this and you're like, where does the pilot even sit? It's almost like an exosuit. I don't want to say battle armor, but that Spider mech seems really, really small. And then there's some artwork where you've got some infantry running alongside a marauder. And one guy is like super heroic. He's got just a pistol. It's not even a laser pistol. It's like a stub pistol. And he's just firing off. And the marauder is one step behind him. And you're like, this guy's just going to get squished. It's towering. It's huge. You'd say that, and I understand perspective, but you'd look and say, how does the mech warrior even get into the mech without some sort of like crane or assistance or like mech deployment to actually get in to pilot this thing? You're not climbing up on this mech. So we have that. Within the miniature scale itself, now Catalyst, I believe, from what I've seen, and the mechs that I own with some of the 3D printed true scale Mech Warrior Online mechs, a lot has been corrected. The old Iron Wind medals, that scale is kind of weird and wonky. It was just kind of like whatever the sculpt in the moment. You look at the classic Stalker. Now, I understand it's like trying to stalk and it's like trying to move, so it's hunched a little bit. Compare that to some of the other medium mechs, and it almost looks like the Stalker is a medium mech. You look at the Awesome mech looks a little small in the classic designs. Put the Awesome next to the Atlas, and of course the Atlas is huge. The Awesome should be equally as huge. So scale really wasn't always across the board. An example would be the Iron Wind Metal Shadowhawk versus the current edition of the Shadowhawk. Huge difference in size. So even that hasn't always been consistent, but it's been kind of good enough to play. I would say in terms of Battletech consistency of size, I don't really get into it that much. I don't really pay attention to it that much other than I try to scale my terrain correctly. And, it's interesting. The tank perspective is completely off. When you think about tanks in Battletech, these are massively sized machines. If you remember the classic game Ogre, where that's the size of some of these tanks. Look at a Rommel. Look at a Patton. We're not even talking a Behemoth. We're talking like a heavy assault tank. These things are massive in size in itself. almost essentially a mech on treads. Compare a heavy battle tank to a medium mech like the Spider. They're similar in size, one with legs, one with treads. So these war vehicles, tanks in Battletech, skimmers and hovers, they're actually really, really big. So that kind of messes with your scale too, where you're like, well, the mechs are really small compared to tanks. No, the tanks are actually really large, going back to the scale and size of an infantry, a single piece. Then you get into battle armor, and the classic battle armor looks a little bit big. Maybe battle armor should be a little bit smaller. I understand it's supposed to take on a mech and take on vehicles. It's quite a few steps up from infantry. It's not just like, here's infantry, here's armored infantry, and now here's battle armor. Battle armor is a significant adjustment, but even that seems a little bit off. So all of that, to answer the question, Battletech does have a defined scale, but based on the literal era and interpretation of the mechs, there is a lot of play in between that. I just try my best to scale the terrain as best I can for kind of universal mech size. So visually, how it looks on the table, how windows and doors are carved out and modeled for humanoid size versus mech size to give that perception. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Scale in Battletech, how important is it? Is it a major factor? If it's close. And second, I think we agree, we established the Catalyst plastics as the benchmark for the size and scale of mechs, vehicles, and supporting infantry.